Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to join you here today for this important discussion. I'm grateful to Chatham House for regularly providing a platform for open dialogue and exchange on Somalia as part of its focus for this century to enable and build peaceful, sustainable and inclusive societies. Chatham House, throughout the first century of its existence, has been a friend to Africa and the global South, giving audience to legendary independence leaders such as the 1931 address by Mahatma Gandhi, where he set out the vision that still drives India today, 90 years on. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Laura Hammond for her kind introduction and particularly for her continued service and dedication to social issues in the Horn of Africa and globally. Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, we meet at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic has cost the world over 2 million lives thus far, disrupted lives and livelihoods, and is leading to the deepest global recession. The crisis has magnified the disparities and inequalities of the world we share. It is currently playing out in a vaccine nationalism, where some countries have secured billions of doses of COVID-19 vaccines, while others struggle to access supplies. Where over 108 million doses of the vaccine have been administered, and less than 50,000 of that number is in Africa. Even if there was access, a country like Somalia would not be in a position to financially place an order for purchase and would only depend on the goodwill of the world to donate vaccines. The COVID-19 crisis has also aggravated and magnified economic and social challenges that already exist within nations. In the Horn of Africa, simmering political tensions in Ethiopia has led to armed conflict in the Tigray region, with thousands of refugees crossing the border into Sudan, even as border tensions escalate between Ethiopia and Sudan. These tensions, along with Eritrea's long-standing conflict with the TPLF and the Somalia-Kenya border challenges, may alter the regional order and endanger stability. Somalia finds itself in the middle of a volatile region with its additional baggage of 30 years of uncertainty and instability. To weather this unprecedented storm, the Somali people must therefore understand the grave importance of sustaining the progress achieved over the past 2 electoral cycles since the end of our transitional government. For the past decade, despite the shortcomings and challenges in Somalia, there have been indirect electoral processes that were largely viewed as peaceful and acceptable to all political stakeholders, leading to a peaceful transfer of power. Unfortunately, this year, the ongoing electoral impasse risks that hard-earned political culture, which is one of the major positive achievements of the past 30 years. Upholding democracy and conducting free, fair, and transparent elections is not a challenge only in Somalia, and while democracy is the most preferred system of governance, we have recently learned that it requires strong and mature institutions to ensure its protection, although it is the citizens' fundamental rights. Citizens around the world have the right to elect their preferred leaders, but sometimes the result of seemingly democratic elections can produce undecided leadership that puts to test all democratic values and ideals. Other times, democracy can be hijacked in the absence of strong institutions. The recent US election is the latest example of how well-functioning institutions safeguarded the world's oldest serving democracy. Therefore, if there was ever any doubt of the importance of strong, viable institutions, the aftermath of the US 2020 election is our lesson. Somalia, as a nation, can affirm in the absence of a strong and viable institutions, individuals take on that role, and we depend on the goodwill of those individuals to prevent the nation from crisis and conflict. The current electoral impasse, simply put, is a situation where the nation's institutions could not safeguard against attempts to derail the very fabric of the social contract that has existed between the Somali people. This has paved the way for grave mistrust that goes beyond fear of mismanagement of the electoral process. And although there was initially an agreement by the federal government and the federal member states on September 17, 2020, on the conduct of an indirect election, challenges arose in the arbitrary management of the implementation phase. These challenges include the unilateral appointment of electoral management committees that included civil servants, security personnel, and known supporters of the current leadership. It also included the undue interference in the electoral management of the Somaliland seats. It included the unrest in some of the federal member states, especially in Gedo and in Beledweyne, as a result of interference by the FGS with the intention of unduly influencing the electoral process. It also included the real fear of militarized election. History tells us that the development and trajectory of fragile countries such as ours are inevitably linked to the management of electoral processes. An attempt to arbitrarily implement an electoral process without the agreement of the majority of the political stakeholders will result in a dire consequence and might have long-lasting repercussions. The main risk of a disputed electoral process will result in a disputed outcome that will not be legitimate in the eyes of the majority of the stakeholders. That would constitute a great setback in a fragile democracy like Somalia. Such an election would also aggravate our already fragile security situation and further embolden Al-Shabaab and other armed groups. The improved political stability over the past 10 years has also resulted in an energized business community, and this will undoubtedly reverse this positive trend, impacting the livelihoods and aspirations of our population. Somalia's revival has also been attributable in part to the generosity of our international partners whose public funds are collected from populations who freely and fairly elect their leaders. In the event of an undemocratic and arbitrary electoral process, it is unlikely that this support will continue at current levels. A volatile electoral process would also dampen the recent active participation by Somalia's youth in our country's reconstruction. Ladies and gentlemen, to further paint this picture, Somalia soon will be in an uncharted territory. The mandate of our federal parliament, the backbone of our democracy, expired on the 27th of December 2020. And in 4 days, our country faces a critical constitutional crisis where the president's mandate expires on February 8. Considering both the executive and legislature will have lost the legitimacy to govern, the only solution to avert this looming crisis is therefore an immediate political solution. The focus should now shift to a consensus-based agreement between all political stakeholders. These will include the federal member states, representatives of the government whose term is expiring, the union of the presidential candidates, and non-partisan groups such as civil society, women leaders, business community, youth, religious leaders, and members of the international community. To salvage the legitimacy and integrity of the electoral process, all political stakeholders have to be part of the political solution, and agree on the management of the 17th September Agreement, as well as address the constitutional crisis brought on by the expiry of the mandates of the governing institutions. This will require selfless leadership from all stakeholders that puts the nation's interest before personal and political ambition. And while we seek solutions for today's crisis, we must also learn from this challenge so as to not repeat the mistake of the past and rebuild institutions that can safeguard against such situation in the future. Having that in mind, while I was in office, we undertook the biggest and most challenging reforms that our country had undertaken in the past 30 years. The economic reforms that my team and I initiated led to Somalia's attaining decision point for debt relief, an unthinkable accomplishment at that time. The critical and sometimes dangerous security reforms that we undertook reinstated faith in Somalia's security institutions internally and also built trust with our main security partners. The reforms of our civil service contributed to a greater commitment by the government to ingrain a new work culture in our public services to execute their responsibilities. By embracing this new culture of accountability, corruption was no longer a taboo subject. Public servants were more motivated to execute their mandates, and the general public were more committed as engaged citizens willing to do their part in the rebuilding of our nation. The new culture, above all, inspired many of our Somali youth to take their rightful role as the drivers of transformative agenda and change for our country. Unfortunately, the political challenge of the past 6 months, the lack of focus of continued reforms, and the deep mistrust in government's electoral management halted the progress made thus far. For our country to emerge out of its perpetual situation, the next administration must prioritize the rebuilding of viable institutions and a functioning economy in order to be able to provide services, sustain its activities, and ultimately gain legitimacy in the eyes of the Somali people. This is because without functioning economy, any government will not be able to provide services to its people. And any government that is not able to provide services to its people will not enjoy the popular support of its population. And based on my experience, our country cannot establish strong institutions and promote sufficient economic growth in order to meet our society's needs if we do not undertake critical and comprehensive political reforms that are necessary to attain political security and economic stability. For Somalia to achieve political stability that would aid institution building, economic growth, and service delivery, it is important for the next administration's priority to be the completion of the provisional constitution. This would unblock a number of interconnected priorities that have been pending over the past 12 years, including attaining one person, one vote, improved security, and advanced federal structures. The completion of the Constitution would provide the basis for a strong and legitimate governance structures and address the deep mistrust that has existed in the country. The next leadership must therefore prioritize inclusive political dialogue to address the contentious and long-standing issues that have always been set aside to conclude the Constitution. These include, but are not limited to, finding a solution to the status of Mogadishu, having agreement on fiscal federalism, the electoral and political party system, and an agreed structure of government that can lead to stability. The completion of these and other articles will require both technical and political expertise, but the essence of succeeding is to promote inclusive political reform that includes all stakeholders and making it the #1 national agenda. These political objectives will enable the changes we need to encourage social cohesion, improve security, rebuild our economy, attract investors, and enhance the capacity of government to deliver services. This will lay the foundation of the state that the next administration needs to be put in place for the next 4 years, paving the way for a prosperous Somalia that can make its contribution to the region and global community. This will therefore require leadership that has the capacity to bring people together, capitalize on its youthful population, empower our women, and build institutions that can protect the well-being of all Somalis. It will require leadership that understands how to deal with contemporary challenges, take a major role in bridging the divide between Somalia and the region, and can understand that in a globalized world, Somalia cannot chart its path in isolation. It will require leadership that can promote and agree on the agenda of the new Somalia with all political stakeholders and our partners. I am hopeful that if we come together, we Somalis can achieve this. I thank you.